Advocacy is basically supporting children and young people to help them have their voices heard. So it involves, if you kind of think of it as a journey, being alongside a young person, supporting them to say the things that are important for them, making sure their rights are upheld, and supporting them in meetings in various different settings. Apparently it comes from a Latin word which means to speak for. So sometimes it can be speaking for a child, sometimes it can be supporting them to write down what their issues are, and sometimes it can be merely sitting with them in meetings or in various settings, supporting them while they say the things that are important to them, and also giving them information about their rights and entitlements.
And some of the situations that you would help children with can be very, very daunting, and they can be talking about rather complex matter and legal issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So organisationally, Coram Voice works with children and young people who are looked after, so children and young people in care, children and young people who are leaving care, so they can raise issues about where they're living, not feeling happy, having to move, also safeguarding issues where they don't feel safe in the places where they're living or things have happened to them. Another important area of supporting children and young people who are involved in child protection processes and supporting them to talk about the things that are important to them, both prior to meetings and within the child protection process. So yes, it can be very difficult for children and young people in those situations to express what they want to say and to have some involvement in the planning for their future.
This sounds all very positive. I suppose the problem is it's not universally available. Some councils will go for this and they'll put this service on offer, but other councils won't, even though I believe there is a national recommendation that a service like this is in place for children and also people who are vulnerable, who will struggle with certain aspects of the legal system of this country.
Children and young people don't have a universal right to advocacy, that is true, but they have entitlements to advocacy in certain situations and circumstances, and that depends on their care status, whether they're a looked after child or a child who's leaving care, or whether they're involved in the child protection process, or if they're a young person who's in a mental health setting, they're entitled to advocacy, or living in secure accommodation, or a disabled child is also entitled to advocacy in certain situations. So almost universally across England there is provision for some advocacy for looked after children and care leavers. For us at Coram Voice, we take referrals for children and young people to access advocacy from the child or young person themselves, or from other professionals, carers, parents, or even a friend phoning up for another child on their behalf. And what we would do is go back and check with the child and young person who was being referred whether they actually wanted advocacy, and then move forward from then. So the idea for advocacy is to make it as open and accessible for children and young people to access as possible, and also recognising that sometimes for children to contact an advocacy service it can be a little scary. So actually to have someone else to be able to contact and make that referral for them can be really useful and enable access for more children. There isn't a kind of right of access to advocacy within the courts situation. They have guardian ad litems who represent the child's perspective, but that is a different viewpoint from advocacy.
Sorry, that's interesting. Let me just tear that one apart. How does that differ then?
So guardian ad litems are there to listen to the child's point of view and put their point of view across, but they take a best interest point of view. So making an assessment of what would be in the best interest of the child or young person, whereas advocacy is very much just putting across the views of the child and young person without putting a best interest, without taking the best interest into account.
I find that fascinating, actually, because if you say, I'm going to work on best interest, then that, of course, is putting an adult spin on the situation. I mean, I work with this all the time, so I can talk to somebody, they can give me their point of view, and I can say, all right, I've got your point of view, but I believe it's in your best interest to change this, to manipulate that bit, to maybe overemphasise that bit. But then what I'm doing is I'm editing their view for what I believe is the best outcome for that person. So that's the key difference, because what you're doing is you're representing the purity of their thought.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's lots of professionals who work with children and young people who do take a best interest approach, which is right. And actually advocacy is unique in that it doesn't. It's kind of, as I described earlier, walking alongside the child and young person and putting their point of view and the things that are important to them across. In Norfolk, we provide a very good service to children and young people who are looked after, and also in child protection. For young people who are 6 and 7, you work from the point of view of the child and what's important to them, and putting forward their views as they express them at that time. You'd use kind of different mediums to work with them in terms of using pictures and drawings about kind of who's important to them, how they feel safe in places, and there's lots of kind of different methods you can use to engage children, much in the ways you would in a primary school. All our advocates are individuals who are either professionally trained in childcare or who have a number of years' experience in working with children and young people, and we provide bespoke advocacy training for everyone when they start with us, regardless of their kind of professional backgrounds, and then in-depth training in particular areas, and one of those is about communication skills.
How do we move forward with advocacy across the UK?
I mean, I think for Coram Voice, for the charity that I work for, the thing that we would like to see is that children and young people who have an entitlement to advocacy are able to access independent advocacy. So advocacy that's independent from local authorities and is resourced enough to meet the needs of everyone within that group.